The plane now is grounded at the Lahore International Airport and is apparently surrounded by the authorities. The lights at the airport are switched off to prevent the airplane from taking off again. Despite the efforts of the Pakistani authorities, the hijackers somehow managed to make the plane fly again. The hijackers initially intended to land the plane in Oman, but their request was rejected. Consequently, the aircraft was rerouted to Al Minhad Air Base in UAE, where it landed around 3 o'clock in the morning. The hijackers then were subjected to heavy negotiations for the safety and release of the hostages. Neither of the sides were willing to budge. After tense negotiations, the hijackers were to release 26 hostages in exchange for more fuel. The released hostages were sent back to India safely. The released hostages provided some very useful information as to what was happening inside the hijacked aircraft. It was revealed that the men were separated from the women and the children. Everyone was blindfolded so that nobody would know the hijackers' actions. Although, as much as the authorities despised the hijackers' actions, people in the aircraft claimed that the hijackers were decently behaving towards them and were quite affectionate towards the children. It was also found that there were 5 hijackers on board and each of them had a code name. Their code names are as follows. Almost 1 day had passed since the hijacking, and the conditions on board the plane started deteriorating. The passengers were facing worse conditions. The food and water was scarce, and the toilets were in terrible condition. But the hijackers did not care about the whereabouts of the passengers. As the time passed by, the hijackers felt the urgency to leave the Arabian soil, fearing that the Indian authorities would come up with a new and effective plan. However, they came up with a new destination, Afghanistan. This choice was quite unexpected, leading to the speculation about their motives, because back then, Afghanistan was under the control of Taliban. The passengers now started to feel the real burden of this situation. They did not know how the Taliban would treat them, as back then, India did not recognize the Taliban as a legitimate state. So, on the 26th of December, at around 8 in the morning, the plane landed in Afghanistan's Kandahar International Airport. Taliban's authorities offered to be the negotiator between the Indian authorities and the terrorists on board. As mentioned before, India didn't recognize the Taliban, so they sent their private negotiators to Afghanistan for mediating between the two sides. The negotiations, however, did not go as planned, and the passengers on board were stuck inside the aircraft for the next 6 days. Taliban had assembled its armed personnel to surround the plane. They said that their intention was against the hijackers. The Indian government gets somewhat suspicious of Taliban's true intentions. Indian analysts believed that this was done to prevent India from carrying out any military operations. The hijackers demanded around $200 million and release of 36 prisoners from Indian jails in exchange for the lives of the passengers on board. These demands were outrageous, and the Indian government wasn't going to fulfill these demands. However, the authorities were put under constant pressure by the families of the passengers on board the aircraft. Indian authorities believed that safety of the passengers on board should be the number one priority. But the issue wasn't resolved yet. The unsatisfied Indian crowd were carrying out mass protests requesting the government to take actions immediately for the safety of the passengers on board and bringing them back to India. The Indian authorities and the Taliban carried out intense negotiations. The demands were significantly reduced. only 3 prisoners were to be released instead of the original 36. Many of the high-level Indian officers were reluctant to release the prisoners. They believed that it would cause dangerous effects later on. But due to the constant pressure, the prisoners were released and were flown from Delhi to Kandahar. The prisoners were released as soon as they got to Kandahar, and soon enough, the hijackers started releasing the hostages held on board. All the pieces of the puzzle now started to fit together. The Indian authorities thought that now was the time the Taliban would detain the hijackers. But what happened, however, was quite the opposite. The hijackers and the released prisoners were given a vehicle by the Taliban and sent to the Pakistani border. This made it clear about the involvement of Pakistan in this hijacking. The hijackers then safely reached the Pakistani border. On the bright side, however, the passengers were now finally safe. Some of them were injured, while almost all of them were starving due to the lack of food. All of them safely reached back home on the 31st of December. This was surely the most different and horrible start to the new millennium and would live on to be a great telltale for centuries to come. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please make sure to like, share and subscribe. It helps us a lot and gives us motivation to carry on the work. So until next time, goodbye.